What they're doing in New Orleans is very interesting to me, and we've seen it done time and time again. They're much more interested in what happened out in Las Vegas because that guy was a Trump supporter. Okay, great. We're on to something. Let's talk about Vegas. This guy, he's a nutcase, and he appears to be a right winger. But the guy in New Orleans who's, apparently affiliated with or pledges loyalty to ISIS, it's time to move on. That's really not that interesting, even though 14 people are dead in New Orleans as a result of his behavior. And you had, this is while we were on break, or I was on break, but on January 1st, you had the FBI agent Althea Duncan, who's in charge of the Bureau's New Orleans field office, come out, stopping short of even calling it a terrorist attack. Here's that.
Patrick said we'll be taking over the investigative lead for this event. This is not a terrorist event. What it is right now is their improvised explosive devices that was found, and we are working on confirming if it's a viable device or not.
How is it not a terrorist attack? The guy had an Islamic State flag affixed to his rented Ford pickup truck. Later, the deputy assistant director of the FBI's counterterrorism division would say it was 100% inspired by ISIS. The 42-year-old behind it, Shamsuddin Jabbar, who was a U.S. citizen from Texas and an Army vet, had apparently pledged his allegiance to ISIS via the New York Times. So you tell me how it's not a terrorist attack.
I mean, once again, for the FBI, the immediate response, which is we know the motive, and the motive is uncomfortable. So we're going to pretend that that's not really the motive, or the motive is. I mean, it was the least mysterious motive of all time. He literally had an ISIS flag attached to the back of his Ford F-150. He said, "Here's my motive," on a giant flag that I don't even know where you get an ISIS flag. Can you buy that off Amazon? In any case, this person had put out tapes of himself talking to his family about how he had joined ISIS. And honestly, the reason why this should earn more media attention than the terrible case of what happened in Las Vegas, which seems to be a member of the military who had his life breaking down, he seemed to have some mental problems. The reason that this one is more noteworthy is because it is ideological in nature. Not only ideological in nature, one of the stories that we reported at Daily Wire actually was that the local mosque was being contacted by the FBI. Members of that mosque were being contacted by the FBI, the mosque where this person attended, the terrorist, and the alleged terrorist. And the mosque apparently put out a public message, like on their own Instagram, saying, if you are contacted by the FBI, you should contact the Council on American Islamic Relations. You should contact groups that are not the FBI, right? Not cooperate with the FBI. You should call the Council on American Islamic Relations, which, by the way, was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation terrorism trial in the 2000s. The Council on American Islamic Relations original foundation was by people who were closely associated with Hamas. Like, there are actual real systemic problems in the United States with radical Islam. And that's something that people really don't want to talk about, which, of course, is the same sort of thematic that you're seeing in the UK right now, right? You're seeing this sort of breakout into the open because Elon Musk is going after Keir Starmer quite properly. But I think that so much of what you're seeing in the West right now is revolt against the assault on common sense that we've been seeing for legitimately decades here in the West. The revolt on common sense that says that, for example, mass migration without assimilation is a wonderful idea. The revolt on common sense that says that everyone should be forced to take a vaccine, even if the vaccine is not totally vetted out yet. The assault on common sense that says men can be women, women can be, like, what we're watching right now across the board is this revolt against that thing. And it's happening everywhere. It's happening in the UK. It's happening in France. It's happening in Germany. It's already happened in Argentina. It's happened in the United States already. It's obviously happening up in Canada, where the Conservative Party, if the election were held today, would absolutely wipe out the Liberal Party, where Justin Trudeau just resigned as the head of the Liberal Party, if not Prime Minister today. Again, something is happening. And that thing is that people across the board in the West are tired of, to use your word, being bullshitted. And I think that now they're starting to fight back in a wide variety of ways, mostly politically.
I love everything you just said. There so much has gone down over the past couple of weeks, and just today, as you point out, Trudeau, which we'll get to. But I was just sticking for a second on the FBI and its bungling messaging around what happened in New Orleans, which was indeed a terrorist attack. Says as follows at National Review. We are being tormented by the FBI's habitual woke incoherence regarding this atrocity. There should be no hesitancy. This is maddening. But in the FBI, as it has evolved since the Obama era, He says an acknowledgement by the Bureau that an attacker may have been radicalized by fundamentalist Islam would implicitly concede that there is something about that ideology that inspires violent attacks against infidels. Can't have that. They're not willing to go there. And that, of course, explains why they're moving on immediately, the media as well, from New Orleans. But let's talk about the UK, because this rape scandal of children at the hands of immigrants that's been was covered up for years and years and years, allegedly in part because they were concerned that the alleged rapists were Pakistani, and they didn't want to be seen as picking on immigrants or going against people of color and accusing them of rape at the hands, at the expense of the well-being and safety of children. Maybe the most pernicious and disgusting example of this woke ideology and this fear of upsetting or offending any person of color or any Muslim that I've seen in decades, Ben. What's happening in the UK is a deep, disgusting scandal.
Well, what's amazing about it is that people are denying what it's about. So if you actually look at the history of this scandal, this started to break out into the open in a place called Rochdale in the UK back in 2003. And that was because a 15-year-old girl died. And when there was an investigation into why she died, it turns out that she had been one of the girls who was groomed by these gangs. For folks who don't know this story, basically over the course of literally decades, and there are allegations of this going all the way back to the 1970s, basically over the course of decades, white girls were preyed on by Muslim men in gangs. They were rape gangs. They're not grooming. They call them grooming gangs. They weren't grooming gangs. They were rape gangs, because these are all underage girls who are being traded around by these Muslim rape gangs. And that's what they are. And the media knew full well about this back in 2003, 2004. They knew completely about this. The police knew about it. They knew about all these cases. These were already being brought up in Rochdale, in places like Rotherham, in places like Oldham. It was happening in a wide variety of cities. And as it turns out, the police basically decided that because this would be politically unhelpful, they were going to bury these cases. And so they started blaming the girls, claiming it was the girls' own fault, that they had, quote unquote, consented, even though obviously a 13, 14, 15-year-old girl can't consent. Some of these girls got pregnant by their rapists, 13, 14, 15 years old, and the system totally ignored them. One of the journalists in this case, Andrew Norfolk, who reported for The Telegraph in 2010. He's the one who wrote this big cover story for the UK Telegraph, talking specifically about the extent of the scandal in Rochdale. He knew about the case. He's admitted he knew about the cases back in 2003. And the reason that he did not actually report those cases, and again, these are his words, not mine, is he was afraid that it played into quote unquote right-wing narratives that were going to talk about the difficulties of multiculturalism and the problems with importing vast numbers of immigrants from Muslim countries who are not integrating into British national life and not assimilating. They were afraid that the British National Party, the right-wing party, was going to start increasingly winning elections, that the English Defence League, led by Tommy Robinson, was going to increase its popularity. And so they literally just buried the story. They said for a decade, we are not going to even prosecute these cases. And it took a full-scale decade and more of these cases piling up for there to be any prosecutions at all. The first prosecutions, I believe, happened in 2013. That led to a government study that was finally released in 2014, finding that in Rotherham alone, there were 1,400 girls who'd been preyed on in just that city. In just that, so you're talking about thousands of girls who were raped, white girls who were raped by Muslim men. And the reason it wasn't reported is because it was white girls and because it was Muslim men. Now, again, that would be reported, and talk about reportorial malpractice. Okay, so Keir Starmer was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service for a large part of this period, from 2008 to 2013. Keir Starmer, of course, is now the Prime Minister of Great Britain, as head of the Labour Party. And there was a call for the Labour Party, as the head of the government, to now lead a national investigation into these cases, and they denied it. They said, we're not going to do it. Now, to be fair, the Conservative Party had said the same thing. They'd said this is all regional. The regional investigations should go on. But Elon went after Keir Starmer for it, and deservedly so, because Keir Starmer has been part of the system the entire time. And I played tape on my show earlier today of Keir Starmer with the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, talking about the real problems of the UK in 2024, which include a radical uptick since October 7th in Islamophobia, and Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, asking Keir Starmer what could be done to prosecute people who are actually engaged in Islamophobia, right? This sort of conspiracy.
This is the Christopher Hitchens thing, Ben. This is the Christopher Hitchens prediction come to life, right? Who was out there in, I think it was 2009, saying, we have got to call out what's happening in London and elsewhere with the infiltration of this ideology before it's too late. And if we wait too long, all we're going to hear is you're Islamophobic. That's Islamophobia, as opposed to reckoning with the real facts, which is this is not just a religion. This is an ideology that means to conquer.
That's exactly correct. And all of Europe is reacting to this, but in ways that the political establishment doesn't particularly like. So in Germany, that means that the AfD, which is a very right-wing party that has always been, sort of called Nazi-esque, but the reason people oppose them is not because of their original roots. The reason they're opposed now is because they're anti-immigrant. The AfD is picking up steam. Obviously, Elon is lending some of his sort of loudspeaker to the AfD and Alice Weidel, who's the head of the AfD. You're seeing the same thing happen in France with Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party, which has been gaining steam in every single election and keeps being blocked by the quote-unquote centrist party of Emmanuel Macron. You're seeing the same thing in Germany, by the way, where the CDU, which is the centrist party, says we won't sit with the AfD. Okay, guys, you keep trying to keep a lid on the biggest issue in Europe in generations, and it will blow. I mean, this idea that you can just tell the people to sit down and shut up and ignore the fact that their countries are being overrun with people coming from places that hate the country, that really hate the country and hate the civilization. People are only going to take that for so long before it really starts to come out in support for parties that are not within your deemed establishment purview.
That's exactly right. And we could see it happening. I mean, when Angela Merkel was Chancellor of Germany, she opened the borders. There was a massive influx of immigrants who culturally were about as different from Germans as you could get, and shamed anybody who pushed back against it as an Islamophobe, as a xenophobe, as a bigot. And now they're dealing with the real life consequences of that. Eventually, the people find their voices and say, well, I don't want this. It's one thing. And by the way, we've had plenty of time since then to figure out whether these people want to assimilate or not. Right? They want to pretend that every immigrant, whether it's Germany, Canada, the UK, France, or the United States, is akin to the Irish and Italians who came to America in the early 20th century. That they just want a new life and that they're going to adopt the local culture and, it's melting pot. It's not so. And you're seeing examples like what we saw in the UK, not to mention, look at Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she's obviously one of the greatest thinkers alive, warning in her book, Prey, Prey, about what's happening to women and young girls in these European countries as a result of these immigrants. And one by one, these leaders are starting to fall, Ben. I mean, you tell me whether it actually leads to a change in thinking on the left, akin to what we're seeing the left sort of wrestle with in the wake of the Trump victory.
I mean, either it will or they won't have any power anymore. I mean, in the country that Ayaan came from, Geert Wilders is now leading the largest party, right? And Geert Wilders is a very right-wing, anti-immigrant and anti-Islam leader in the Netherlands. So again,
she was originally from Somalia, and then she went to Amsterdam and now was
essentially exiled because they wouldn't give her immigration status because of her perspective. I mean, they essentially decided that she was a persona non grata because of her perspective on immigration, being an ex-Muslim from Africa who had immigrated to the Netherlands. I mean, Ayaan's story is sort of, ahead of its time, but that is the reality that is now besetting, I think, an enormous part of the West. And again, reality is having its way here because reality always has its way. And when it comes to immigration, I mean, so many things have changed about the way the West does immigration. So it used to be that because we didn't have a welfare system and because it actually was a risk to come to places like the United States, you left everything behind, you came here with nothing, and then you were expected to assimilate and make your own way without a welfare system to back you. Because of that, America acted as a magnet to a bunch of different groups who usually were sort of the most risk-seeking members of the Irish population or the Swedish. Like we've had many waves of immigration in the United States: Irish, German, Italian, Swedish, Jewish, Russian, right? A huge number of immigrants in the United States. But once you change that system to make it so that you are neither expected to assimilate or you're expected to earn, right? You're not expected to do either of those things. We have welfare systems that pick you up and you're not expected to assimilate, which is the sort of immigration that the left apparently loves. Well, yeah, I mean, the consequences are going to be pretty dire for any civilization that attempts that particular two-step. And those civilizational consequences have been quite dire and pretty terrible.
You know how much my family and I love our dogs. Yes, even Strudwick. He was so sweet on our vacation. I can't imagine life without them. These guys have a great life, but some dogs are not so lucky. And this is why I'm so glad to tell you about Delta Rescue, the largest no-kill, care-for-life animal sanctuary in the world. They have rescued thousands of dogs, plus cats and horses too. They provide all the animals with shelter and safety, and most of all, with love. and they've been doing it for more than 45 years now. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions, and giving can bring tax benefits to you too. Speak with your estate planner about how you can grow your estate while helping animals in need. And check out the estate planning tab on their website to learn more. We love our Thunder in Strudwick, but would like for other dogs who need love to find it too. Visit deltarescue.org today to learn more. That's deltarescue.org. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.